In recent years, my attention, along with a number of other researchers, has focused on how the shifting role of the church in the community has moved more towards economic and or political organization. Now, of course, this is not a new phenomena, but what has alarmed me is the way that external groups now are utilizing the African American church as a point of access to the larger community. We've seen also the way that mass media has particularly concentrated leadership tendencies within the black ministry, whereas many times these ministers are not qualified to speak on these critical issues that they're being asked to discuss and discourse on. They don't necessarily have the qualifications to deal with health-related issues, to deal with economic issues, to deal with certain political issues, but nonetheless, mass media continues to go to these particular set of ministers, and as a consequence, we see an inordinate amount of power is then relegated to these particular ministers because they have public access. We, the members of the baby boom generation, have grown up in an era where mass media, television, radio, cinema, and now the internet, mass media has become ever more critical in our own personal lives at redirecting many of our thoughts, our perceptions, eventually being influential on our behaviors as individuals, as family, as a larger community, and ultimately reshaping the culture of the entire society. And this influence of mass media has really had come into conflict with the traditional role that religion played in our lives in shaping individual, family, group, and community behaviors. And so I really see now a fusion occurring between the tradition of religion and being this influence and the way that, especially when we see the way that religion became usurped by the power of mass media. So I think it only a natural evolution that those in control of mass media would come eventually back around to say, but wait a minute, we have all of this influence and this power over people's lives. If we then add to that fundamental of religion and come again one more time, we can have even more control. And of course, we can see with the rise of televangelism in the 1980s with that whole Ronald Reagan era, where we have the actor now, the top political charismatic leader in this country, we can see the rise of televangelism with this fusion of mass media and religion to really bring a whole new level of influence, control over people's lives. Some people, myself included, think that this partnership does definitely pose some significant dangers to the larger community's self-interest. At the end of the enslavement, during the Reconstruction period, black leadership was itself drawn from within the body church politic. And many of the most prominent ministers then went on to Congress and to various state houses of government. And the deconstruction of Reconstruction, we saw then a suppression of this particular movement. These ministers came back home. Many of them told us to go along with the Jim Crow policies. Their lives were in danger, and they perceived, rightly so, that the danger from the Night Riders, the Ku Klux Klan, and the lynching movement would have us kind of repress some of our political aims. Then, beginning in 1917, we saw a whole new phase with the military intelligence group coming in to monitor, to spy, and as well as to establish a kind of separate and loyal leadership utilizing the clergy, utilizing the organization within the church, and utilizing organizations such as the NAACP, which of course had a very close relationship with the black religious experience. So this is always going through various phases, and I think that each phase is really very distinct and requires our close and separate analysis. Now, if we bring this up to date and look at the way that we've seen the rise of the super clergy, where we have one or two or three very prominent ministers per state or per region, when we look very closely at these particular individuals, we can quite often see, such as the case of T.D. Jakes gives a great example of a relationship, not just a close relationship between T.D. Jakes and George Bush, the current person who sleeps with the First Lady, occupant of the White House, maybe I should say. We not only see a close personal relationship between T.D. Jakes and George Bush, but we can see that in the evolution of T.D. Jakes, and he stands only as one example of this process, in his evolution we can see that financing, political arrangements, and other type of arrangements occurred between T.D. Jakes, the less prominent T.D. Jakes, and the Bush family. I think that this relationship between the black clergy, the political parties, the executive branch, and in particular the relationship between the black church and the intelligence and security apparatus is something that we would be best to scrutinize very, very closely. And when we witness things that are not necessarily in the group's self-interest, I think it serves our best self-interest to actually come in, critique, criticize, and put some checks on these particular ministers, because I think they're quite often going over their boundaries.